Knights stand among the most iconic figures in Western history, representing ideals of chivalry, bravery, and martial prowess. These mounted warriors shaped the military and political landscapes of medieval Europe from the early Middle Ages through to the Renaissance. Yet beyond their romanticized portrayal in literature and legend, knights were complex figures bound by a strict code of ethics, deeply entrenched in the feudal system and defined by the tools and technologies of their time. In this comprehensive analysis, we will examine the history of knights as warriors, exploring their origins, the evolution of their role on the battlefield, their weapons and armor, the code of chivalry they followed, and their enduring legacy. The concept of knighthood emerged during the chaotic period following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century. As Europe fragmented into a patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, and fiefdoms, the political landscape became dominated by warlords and regional rulers who competed for territory. The constant threat of invasion by Viking, Magyar, and Muslim forces exacerbated this instability. The feudal system developed as a means of maintaining order and ensuring defense. In this system, powerful lords owned vast estates and distributed land to vassals in exchange for military service. The vassals, often trained warriors, were responsible for protecting the lord's land and people. From this militarized society emerged a new class of mounted soldiers, or knights, whose skills and status were inextricably linked to the feudal structure. By the 9th and 10th centuries, heavy cavalry had proven to be the most effective military force on the battlefield. Knights, with their superior armor, weapons, and horses, became the dominant force in European warfare. The very word knight derives from the Old English knight, meaning servant or warrior, though it would soon take on a more specialized meaning as a mounted warrior bound by feudal ties. The Carolingian dynasty and the rise of the knightly class. The Carolingian dynasty, particularly under Charlemagne, 768 to 814, played a significant role in shaping the knightly class. Charlemagne expanded the use of cavalry in his campaigns, recognizing the strategic advantages of mounted warriors who could strike quickly and decisively. His empire's vast size and the need for rapid communication and response made cavalry an essential component of his military strategy. The Frankish practice of granting land to warriors in return for their service became widespread during this period. This not only secured the loyalty of the warriors, but also allowed them to equip themselves with the expensive armor, weapons, and horses needed to serve as knights. The fief, a piece of land granted by a lord to a vassal, became the economic foundation of knighthood. In exchange for the fief, the vassal swore fealty to his lord and was expected to provide military service when called upon. The use of stirrups, introduced to Europe by the Avars in the 8th century, further revolutionized cavalry warfare. Stirrups allowed knights to maintain their balance while wielding heavy lances and swords, making them more effective in battle. This technological advancement solidified the role of the knight as the most formidable warrior of the medieval battlefield. The ideal of chivalry, the development of chivalric codes. As knights became more powerful and integral to medieval society, there arose a need to regulate their behavior. The early Middle Ages were marked by violence, lawlessness, and constant warfare. To mitigate this and ensure that knights used their martial prowess in the service of justice and order, the concept of chivalry was developed, derived from the French word chevalerie, meaning horseman or cavalryman. Chivalry initially referred to the skills and virtues expected of a mounted warrior. However, by the 12th century, it had come to embody a broader ethical code that knights were expected to follow. Chivalry emphasized bravery. Knights were to be fearless in battle, displaying courage in the face of danger. Loyalty, a knight's loyalty to his lord and to the church, was paramount. Honor, personal honor was highly prized, and knights were expected to act with integrity in all aspects of life. Generosity and courtesy. Knights were to show generosity, particularly towards the poor and weak, and display courtesy, especially towards women. Justice. Chivalry promoted the idea of knights as defenders of the weak and protectors of justice. Religious elements were also woven into the chivalric code. Knights were often seen as warriors of God, tasked with defending Christendom and upholding Christian virtues. This idea would come to the forefront during the Crusades, when knights were called upon to defend the Holy Land from Muslim forces. The influence of courtly love. Closely tied to the ideals of chivalry was the notion of courtly love, a romanticized and highly stylized form of love between a knight and a noblewoman. This concept, popularized by troubadours and poets in the courts of France and England, emphasized the knight's devotion to his lady, often placing her on a pedestal as an unattainable figure. While courtly love was often more an ideal than a reality, it played a significant role in shaping the behavior and attitudes of knights. The knight's duty to his lady was seen as an extension of his duty to his lord and to God. This notion reinforced the idea that knights should act honorably and virtuously, not only in battle, but in their personal relationships as well. The evolution of knightly armor. Armor was the knight's first line of defense in battle, providing crucial protection against a variety of weapons. Over the centuries, knightly armor evolved from simple chainmail hauberks to the elaborate and highly specialized plate armor of the late Middle Ages. Early armor, chainmail, 11th to 12th century. The earliest form of armor used by knights was chainmail, or mail, a flexible and relatively lightweight form of protection made from interlocking rings of iron or steel. Chainmail had its roots in Roman and early medieval armor, but it became the standard for European knights from the 9th to 12th centuries. A typical piece of chainmail armor worn by a knight was the hauberk, a long tunic made entirely of chainmail rings that extended from the shoulders to the knees. The hauberk provided excellent protection against slashing attacks from swords and axes, but it was less effective against blunt force or piercing weapons like arrows. In addition to the hauberk, knights often wore a coif, a chainmail hood, to protect their head and neck. Mail leggings, called chausses, and mittens or gauntlets were also used to protect the limbs. Chainmail was worn over a padded garment known as a gambeson, which absorbed the force of blows and helped prevent injury from blunt trauma. Strengths of chainmail. Flexibility. Chainmail allowed a high degree of movement, which was essential for mounted combat. Lightweight. Compared to later plate armor, chainmail was lighter and easier to wear for long periods. Weaknesses of chainmail. Limited protection against blunt force. Chainmail could not fully absorb the impact of heavy blows from maces or war hammers. Vulnerability to piercing weapons. Arrows, crossbow bolts, and lances could sometimes penetrate chainmail, especially when aimed at weak points. Transitional armor, chainmail and plate, 13th to 14th century. As warfare evolved, so too did armor. By the 13th century, knights began to supplement their chainmail with pieces of plate armor, especially over vital areas like the chest and shoulders. This transitional period saw the development of the coat of plates, a garment consisting of metal plates sewn into a leather or cloth backing, worn over the hauberk. Knights also began to wear great helms, large cylindrical helmets that provided more comprehensive protection for the head than the earlier chainmail coifs. These helmets had narrow slits for vision and small holes for breathing, sacrificing some visibility and comfort for protection. Strengths of transitional armor. Improved defense. The addition of plate armor to vital areas made knights less vulnerable to powerful weapons like lances and maces. Knights could choose to wear different combinations of plate and mail, depending on the battlefield conditions. Weaknesses of transitional armor. The inclusion of plate armor increased the overall weight of the knight's armor. Restricted movement. Early plate armor pieces were not as well articulated as later designs, making movement more cumbersome. Full plate armor. The height of medieval protection. By the 15th century, full plate armor had become the pinnacle of knightly protection. Made entirely of interlocking steel plates, this armor covered the knight from head to toe, providing unparalleled protection against nearly all forms of attack. The breastplate and backplate protected the knight's torso, while the arms and legs were shielded by pauldrons, shoulder guards, vambraces, forearm guards, cuisses, thigh guards, and greaves, shin guards. Articulated joints allowed for a surprising degree of mobility despite the armor's weight. The helmet of the full plate era was often the visored helm, which had a hinged faceplate that could be lifted to improve visibility or lowered for protection during combat. Other popular helmet designs included the bassinet and the sallet, each offering a balance between protection and practicality. Plate armor was worn over a padded arming doublet to cushion the knight and distribute the weight evenly. Despite its bulk, plate armor was designed to be as comfortable as possible for extended use in battle or on campaign. Strengths of full plate armor. Complete protection. Full plate armor protected knights from most weapons, including arrows, swords, and blunt force. Articulation. By the 15th century, plate armor was highly articulated, allowing knights to move freely despite the armor's weight. Weaknesses of full plate armor. Full plate armor was costly to produce and maintain, making it accessible only to the wealthiest knights. By the late Middle Ages, the spread of firearms and gunpowder weaponry rendered even the best plate armor vulnerable. Weapons of the knight. While a knight's armor protected him on the battlefield, his weapons were the tools with which he earned glory and victory. Knightly weapons evolved over time, but they remained focused on the principles of heavy impact, penetration, and versatility. The sword, symbol of the knight. The sword was the quintessential weapon of the knight and the symbol of his status as a warrior. Throughout the Middle Ages, the design of swords evolved in response to changing armor technologies and battlefield tactics. Early swords, 10th to 12th century, were typically double-edged, straight-bladed, and one-handed, designed for slashing attacks against lightly armored opponents. These swords often had simple crossguards and were used in conjunction with shields. By the 13th century, as chainmail and plate armor became more prevalent, swords evolved to be more effective against these defenses. Arming swords, which were shorter and more robust, became standard for knights, offering a balance between cutting power and thrusting capability. In the 14th and 15th centuries, longswords became popular among knights. These weapons were longer, with a hand-and-a-half grip that allowed for both one-handed and two-handed use. Longswords were highly versatile, capable of powerful cuts, thrusts, and half-swording techniques, gripping the blade with one hand for precise thrusts. For mounted combat, knights used broadswords and falchions, single-edged swords with a heavier blade designed for chopping blows from horseback. Strengths of swords. Swords could be used for both cutting and thrusting, making them useful in a variety of combat situations. The sword was a symbol of knighthood, often used in ceremonial and judicial contexts. Weaknesses of swords. By the time plate armor became common, swords had difficulty penetrating the toughest armor, leading knights to rely more on other weapons. The lance, weapon of the cavalry charge. The lance was the primary weapon of knights in mounted combat. Used in cavalry charges, the lance was a long spear designed to deliver a devastating blow with the full force of the knight's charge behind it. Lances were typically made of wood, with a steel tip for penetrating enemy armor. The use of the lance in the couched position, tucked under the knight's arm, allowed the knight to maintain stability and control during the charge, concentrating the force of the blow into a single point. Knights often broke their lances in the initial impact, after which they would switch to swords or other weapons for close combat. Lances were also used in jousting, the popular tournament sport that became a symbol of chivalry in the late Middle Ages. Strengths of the lance. The lance was one of the most devastating weapons on the battlefield, capable of breaking through enemy lines and inflicting serious damage. The cavalry charge with lance in hand became the iconic image of medieval knights in warfare. Weaknesses of the lance. Lances often broke upon impact, requiring knights to switch to secondary weapons. The lance was unwieldy at close range, making it unsuitable for prolonged engagements. Polearms and maces, anti-armor weapons. As armor became more effective, knights and infantry alike turned to weapons designed to bypass or crush through heavy defenses. Maces and warhammers were popular among knights for their ability to deliver powerful concussive blows. These weapons were especially effective against plate armor, which could withstand cutting weapons but not the crushing force of a mace or hammer. Polearms, such as the halberd and pollux, were long-handled weapons with axe heads, hammers, and spikes, Designed to both cut and pierce armor, these weapons gave knights additional reach and versatility in both mounted and dismounted combat. Strengths of polearms and maces. These weapons were designed to exploit the vulnerabilities of armor, particularly against heavily armored opponents. Polearms could be used for cutting, thrusting, and hooking opponents. Weaknesses of polearms and maces. These weapons required strength and skill to wield effectively. While effective, maces and polearms lacked the prestige of swords and lances. The role of knights in warfare. The knight on the battlefield. The image of the knight as a heavily armored warrior, mounted on a powerful warhorse, charging into battle with a lance, is one of the most enduring depictions of medieval warfare. Knights were indeed formidable combatants, and their effectiveness on the battlefield was due in large part to their heavy armor, powerful weapons, and disciplined tactics. Knights fought in a variety of ways, but the most iconic form of knightly combat was the cavalry charge. Armed with a lance, knights would charge at full speed towards the enemy, using the weight of their horse and the momentum of their charge to break through enemy lines. The lance, typically made of wood and tipped with iron or steel, was a devastating weapon when wielded by a charging knight. After the initial charge, knights would often switch to swords or maces for close combat. In addition to their offensive capabilities, knights were also known for their defensive prowess. Their armor, which evolved significantly over the centuries, was designed to protect them from a wide range of weapons, including swords, arrows, and crossbow bolts. Early knights wore chainmail armor, which consisted of thousands of interlocking metal rings that provided flexibility and protection. By the late Middle Ages, plate armor had become the standard, offering even greater protection without sacrificing too much mobility. The importance of castles. While knights were primarily known for their role on the battlefield, they also played a crucial role in the defense of medieval fortifications. Castles, the centers of feudal power, were often defended by knights, who used their military expertise to repel attackers. The siege was one of the most common forms of medieval warfare, and knights were frequently called upon to lead or participate in the defense of castles. Castles were designed to withstand prolonged sieges with thick stone walls, towers, and moats that made them difficult to capture. Knights used a variety of tactics to defend castles, including archery, sallying forth to harass besieging forces, and engaging in hand-to-hand combat if the attackers breached the walls. On the offensive side, knights also played a role in besieging enemy castles. Siege warfare required patience, as attackers often had to wait for weeks or months to starve out the defenders. Knights participated in assaults on castles, using siege engines like battering rams, trebuchets, and catapults to break down walls and gates. The Crusades. Knights as defenders of Christendom. The call to crusade. The Crusades were a series of religious wars launched by European Christians in the late 11th century to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim control. Knights were at the forefront of these campaigns, and the Crusades provided them with an opportunity to demonstrate their martial prowess while fulfilling their religious obligations. The First Crusade, 1096 to 1099, was initiated by Pope Urban II, who called upon the knights of Europe to take up arms and defend the Christian pilgrims who were being harassed by Muslim forces in the Holy Land. Urban's call resonated deeply with the knightly class, who saw the Crusades as a chance to gain both spiritual rewards, such as indulgences and the forgiveness of sins, and earthly rewards, land and wealth in the newly conquered territories. The role of knights in the Crusades. The knights who participated in the Crusades were among the most elite warriors of their time. They fought in a series of brutal and protracted campaigns, including the Siege of Jerusalem in 1099 and the Battle of Hattin in 1187. The Crusades were characterized by both large-scale battles and small skirmishes, and knights played a central role in the success and failures of these campaigns. Knights were often organized into military orders, the most famous of which were the Knights Templar, Knights Hospitaller, and Teutonic Knights. These orders combined the ideals of knighthood with the principles of monasticism, as knights took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, while also committing themselves to the defense of Christian lands. The Knights Templar, in particular, became one of the most powerful and influential military orders during the Crusades. Founded in 1119, the Templars were tasked with protecting Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. They were known for their discipline, bravery, and martial skill, and they played a key role in many of the battles and sieges that took place during the Crusades. The legacy of the Crusades. The Crusades had a profound impact on the knights who participated in them, as well as on European society as a whole. Many knights returned from the Holy Land with new experiences, wealth, and prestige, while others were left disillusioned by the brutality and failure of the later Crusades. The Crusades also helped to spread the ideals of knighthood and chivalry across Europe, as knights who had fought in the Holy Land became celebrated figures in their home countries. The Crusades reinforced the notion of knights as defenders of Christendom, and they left a lasting legacy in the form of the many military orders that continued to exist long after the end of the Crusades. The decline of knighthood, the rise of professional armies. By the late Middle Ages, the role of knights on the battlefield began to diminish. Advances in military technology, particularly the widespread use of longbows and firearms, made heavy cavalry less effective. The Battle of Agincourt, 1415, during the 100 Years' War between England and France, demonstrated the vulnerability of knights to well-trained infantry and archers. English longbowmen decimated the French knights, signaling a shift in the nature of warfare. As feudalism declined, kings and lords increasingly relied on professional armies rather than vassals for military service. These armies were often composed of paid soldiers who fought on foot and used weapons like pikes, halberds, and early firearms. The Swiss pikemen and German Landsknechte became renowned for their effectiveness against cavalry, further diminishing the importance of knights in battle. The changing role of castles, the rise of artillery and gunpowder-based siege weapons also changed the role of knights in warfare. Castles, once the bastions of feudal power, became increasingly vulnerable to cannon fire. The traditional role of knights in defending and attacking castles was undermined by the advent of gunpowder, as fortifications had to adapt to new technologies. The Star Fort, designed to withstand cannon fire, replaced the medieval castle as the dominant form of military architecture. The legacy of knighthood. Knighthood in the Renaissance and early modern period. While the military importance of knights declined during the Renaissance and early modern period, the ideals of chivalry and knighthood continued to influence European society. Many monarchs established orders of knighthood as a means of rewarding loyalty and service. These orders, such as the Order of the Garter in England and the Order of the Golden Fleece in Burgundy, preserved the traditions of knighthood even as their military role faded. Knights also retained a ceremonial role in European courts, participating in tournaments, jousts, and other displays of martial skill. These events, while no longer connected to warfare, kept alive the chivalric ideals of bravery, honor, and courtesy.